You are listening to the BSI Business Growth Toolkit, a series from The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, in collaboration with Innovate UK Business Growth.
Hello, my name is Matthew Childs, and this is the BSI Business Growth Toolkit, a series from The Standard Show, developed in collaboration with Innovate UK Business Growth. Innovate UK is the UK's innovation agency, and Innovate UK Business Growth is the agency's national business growth and scaling service. Every year, it helps thousands of businesses to sharpen their commercial strategies, realise the maximum value from their IP, raise game-changing investment, and take their businesses onto the global stage through tailored one-to-one support. In this series, we're looking at the relationship between standards and some key business issues, with particular relevance for SMEs. This episode of the series is on the relationship between intellectual property, innovation management, and standards. And our expert guides are Andrew Stanton and Andrew Phillips, in conversation with Victoria Milne. We'll hear how the relationship between an organisation's innovation management system and their IP strategy can go hand in hand. And that rather than introducing additional admin burdens, taking a systematic and structured approach to innovation and IP management can streamline innovation activities and reduce the potential for complexities further down the line. And that through the use of standards, such as ISO 56005, guidance for supporting the role of IP within innovation management, organisations can maximise the likelihood of successfully bringing innovations to market. Before we hear the conversation, a reminder that you can rate, review and subscribe to The Standard Show wherever you get your podcasts. And you can get in touch and find and follow us on social media too. All the details are in the show notes. And the show notes are also where you can find a link to all the episodes in the series. Andrew Stanton is an innovation management professional with deep expertise in business administration, processes and intellectual property. He has a proven track record of successfully implementing systems, technologies and best practices to enhance business operations across international markets. He's also a standards maker, a member of the ISO committee TC279, responsible for developing standards for innovation management. A chartered engineer, Andrew Phillips has built his career in manufacturing, specialising in innovative products. He now divides his time between providing process improvement consultancy in manufacturing and healthcare and serving as an innovation and growth specialist within the Innovate UK Business Growth team in the southwest of England. And with more than 20 years' experience in innovation, strategy, design, branding, advertising and marketing, Victoria Milne leads Tenshi Consulting, an innovation management consultancy. Like Andrew Stanton, Victoria is also a standards maker, developing standards in the area of design and innovation management, including the ISO 56000 series, international standards for innovation management. Victoria started by asking Andrew Stanton about what is meant by intellectual property.
Well, there are many different forms and types of IP. They generally fall into two distinct categories. There are those that are associated with artistic rights, such as copyright and broadcasting rights. And then there are the industrial rights, which are the ones that most people are very familiar with within a business context, which are patents, trademarks, design right, and then they tend to be either in the public domain, so what I've just been talking about are registrable rights that are available for public inspection, but then also, there is trade secrets and there's know-how which are effectively protected internally within organizations and don't reach the public domain. Pretty much anything you can think about will be covered by intellectual assets and property in some form or other. You look around you, look at anything you can see around you, there will be IP that will be associated with that. Anything you can hear, anything you see that has been the product of creativity, of human creativity, is effectively potentially a subject for intellectual property.
I think one of the really interesting areas that is often overlooked, and you touched on it, know-how, that which is internal in the organization that is intellectual property, is insight and the insights that companies can uncover when they're looking at exploring opportunities for their innovation. And so it's quite early stage, but those insights are often the most valuable area, and being able to have proof that you have uncovered these insights and that you have some degree of ownership of those insights can be hugely beneficial if there is ever any conflict with regards to competition and having to be able to prove that you have originated the idea before anyone else. Have you ever had that type of challenge, Andrew Phillips, when working with some of the SMEs that you're supporting when it comes to kind of managing their IP and innovation process?
I think particularly within small growing companies, managing and protecting that know-how is an area of concern. And if we look at the innovation standards, it guides us through sort of a 5-step process of innovate, create, validate, develop, and then deploy. And whilst they have that sort of eureka moment, they have the initial idea and then they move forward to create something, they can keep the know-how within the organization, within their 4 walls. And I think the challenge for them is how do they then both develop their idea, protect their know-how, but crucially validate the idea. And I think for some companies, they can skip the validation step to protect their know-how, to protect their idea, but I think at the risk of the quality of the idea itself.
That is absolutely so critical, particularly when we're looking at that stage of minimizing uncertainties. And Andrew Stanton, with minimizing uncertainties and IP, how does that really work for a business when they're attempting to apply an innovation management system? They're looking at minimizing uncertainties and validating a potential new idea. When it comes to IP, what should they be looking at there? Should they be looking to see what others are doing? Should they go and see what's registered? I mean, what are the steps that an organization should take at that point?
I mean, there are various misconceptions about IP as an organisation is innovating and creating, particularly if it's a small early stage organisation. Some of the misconceptions are that that IP is not actually needed. That simply having their company and sort of existing and then developing their products and services that the IP system is going to be too expensive to use, that it's going to be too burdensome, that it's going to prevent them from being able to sort of get their investments through. But on the contrary, in fact, actually, instead of thinking about things in the sort of one of the things that's really important about IP is that it's actually a negative right that prevents others from doing stuff commercial. So you can actually end up in IP disputes if you don't consider the IP as part of your innovation process. And particularly as you are validating your concept and you're sort of going to be developing something and bringing it to the marketplace, you're going to be coming in contact with other organizations within the market space that are also operating and might have their own IP. So if you don't have protection in place, then you are at risk of not being able to commercialize your product or service. So as part of that validation process that you were alluding to, you need to be looking at the landscape, you need to be monitoring the landscape and seeing what organizations are doing, what they have that's protected on the marketplace, carry out a freedom to operate search, and then position your IP position according to what's going on in the marketplace.
Right. So there is a job to be done around having an IP strategy and proactively, engaging in IP out there. And I think that probably is sometimes missed because we often think that IP management is simply protecting our final end product when it goes out there into the market. But in fact, it's a lot more complicated, perhaps, but it shouldn't be more burdensome, really. So what is the right approach to have for an IP strategy?
Well, having an IP strategy is effectively having a structured plan for managing and protecting and leveraging the IP that you have that's going to support your business in your business objectives. And what it involves identifying what IP assets you have within the organization, where appropriate, securing legal protection, building up a portfolio, optimizing that portfolio and monetizing your rights while at the same time minimizing the risks. And as you go along that innovation journey and that innovation process, so the part about minimizing risk becomes more and more important. And a well-defined IP strategy will in fact enhance your competitive position, and it will support your commercialization process. And you providing that it's aligned with your overall business and innovation strategy, it's going to be able to actually strengthen your competitive position within the marketplace. And more importantly, if you are a small business that's growing, if you have made that investment and you've factored IP into your considerations, you're going to be a lot more attractive for investment if you want to seek investment to be able to further grow your business. And in fact, investors will check what processes you have put in place to make sure that you do have an IP position. I mean, you only have to look at, programs like Dragon's Den. If somebody is developing a technology, one of the first questions they will always ask is, what have you done to protect your invention?
Yes, absolutely. So critical. But Andrew Phillips, there's, levels of strategy that need to be taken into account for what can be done by a small business versus a medium-sized business versus a multinational, and how they go about it. What are some of the different approaches that an SME might choose, and how can they identify the right strategy for them? How do you contextualize, I suppose, your strategy for your organization?
Interestingly, since we spoke about the opportunity of doing this podcast, I've quizzed and spoken to a number of companies that we work with through the Innovate UK Business Growth team. And I've asked them, really sort of pick their brains on actually how do they go from the eureka moment through to the product. And interestingly, they all describe a common first step of either they see a market need, a customer comes to them with a problem, or they identify the problem to be solved. Many of them will park it on the to-do list at that point, and they will have a some kind of brainstorm of how can we solve this. But really, there was only one organisation that I've spoken to recently that described a formal stage gate process where they take that idea from the concept list, they go through a brainstorm process and have a formal, actually, do we fund this? Can we get funding? Do we commit our time to this? And if the answer is yes, then they progress to a point of they then have a product. They then have something that is close to that minimal viable product that we might recognize. But they then ask themselves, is it patented? So is there some IP in what we've created? Is there a market fit? Is there return on investment? So all of those things are some of the key elements of that innovation strategy that you would see within the larger companies. Now, interestingly, the others have kind of, or the others that I've spoken to recently, have got elements of that innovation process within what they do, but far more of a gut feel. And interestingly, a couple of them I would describe their innovation processes as very much a sort of an early Dyson evolution of ideas through trial and error. So very iterative, very step by step, without maybe a formal step within the process of, okay, it's working. I'm sure we can come up with an innovation of making, or we can see a product gap of mackerel flavored cake, and I'm sure we could develop such a thing, and we can make it work. I've got no idea if we can protect it, but is there a market need? Well, I've got no idea, but there needs to be those sort of questioning steps where we sit back with a coffee and a cake and ask ourselves the hard questions.
One of the key things is to go from a position where you've just got ideas and you're just looking at solving problems towards actually beginning to use the sort of migrate towards a more systematic approach and more of an IP management type of position, is really to be thinking about, well, what is the plan? What is the plan? What am I going to do with these ideas that I'm coming up with? Because one of the misconceptions of IP is that it's very expensive. So they don't think about IP because they're just put off by the cost. But you can get a trademark for, a few £100. It doesn't have to be expensive. But it may be expensive if you've got very ambitious plans and you're wanting to go for global market domination, and your idea is going to be a unicorn that's going to be something that changes the world. Yes, it can become very expensive. But it happens at different stages. The costs do not come all at once. The key thing is to have a plan. Have a plan for what you're going to do with the problems that you're solving. And then once you have got your plan, you can then start thinking about, well, what's in place? What are my objectives? How am I going to get there? And look at the IP system and look what's available. There are many different forms of IP. People think of IP and they just think of patents, but there are many different forms of IP and using the IP system is there to support the business and to be able to make your idea stronger, to make it more attractive. It's all about building an intellectual asset. It's building something that has value within the organization. And that can happen progressively over time. It will evolve over time. As the organization grows, as the organization goes in different places.
How do we then best manage this? Now that we understand that we need to have a plan, we do need to consider IP within our innovation management. They work as one, but how can we do this in a way that doesn't create significant administrative burden, particularly on SMEs? Because this is often the issue that kind of comes up that we hear them talking about when they think about having to go through a registration process or something like that. How is it best done to minimize the administrative burden? Andrew Phillips.
I think understanding the range of IP options that are available to them, and I think getting good advice early on their product development journey, and as Andrew Stanton said, choosing the right form of IP to protect their innovation at the right level within the appropriate markets for them is what a company should be considering. I've spoke of the companies that I've dealt with and worked with. Some of them have got that absolutely right. They strategically have decided their core market is across Europe, or their core market is across possibly just the UK, and that's where they protect their product. Equally, I've spoken to other very well invested companies who very early in the development process have protected worldwide. And as Andrew has said, the costs associated with that can be huge, and then becomes a distraction from the product development itself. So I think aligning aspiration, aligning their innovation with the appropriate forms of IP protection is the challenge that companies need to piece together.
I think that's really powerful, what you've just said. So aligning that aspiration to the innovation, and then to what your IP strategy really should be all about. So linking the vision, linking the innovation intent, what it is, your strategic direction as your organization, to your innovation management and that system, and including your IP management and system, and getting those to work together, cohesively, actually starts to cut out having to multiply your activity across all of these management systems, so that you start to simply be able to do it in one flush. And I think that's really powerful, what you've touched on there. Andrew Stanton.
Yeah, I would say that, one of the first things, that any organization can do when they're thinking about this is to get an IP audit done. Because if you get an IP audit done, then it will give the organization an understanding of what they have within the business and what they might be able to, how they might be able to use the system. And if you don't have to be a large organization to also make use of standards such as 56005 that provides you with guidelines on how you can then manage your intellectual assets that you have. And it basically is going to provide you with a framework that you can use that is not particularly, it's a structured framework. And if you bring structure into it, and it's not rocket science, it will give you some guidelines on, how to evaluate your business position, looking at SWOT and building some objectives, and then establishing a systematic approach, defining IP responsibility. Who's going to be responsible for it in an organization, and how's the organization going to deal with it, and establishing a culture that promotes and supports the IP and builds awareness and provides a suitable working environment. And then it will give you guidance on how to look at the financial considerations. How much money am I going to need to invest in this if I want to actually make use of the IP system? And I'm better to make use of the IP position, the IP system, if I want my assets to become valuable and attractive in the marketplace. And then the standard will also take you through the innovation process, and it will take you through at a relatively high level by looking at, asking questions about why and looking at the inputs and the outputs relating to, when you're identifying opportunities, how do you sort of look at the technology trends, use IP search databases to be able to sort of get an understanding of what's going on. What considerations do you need when you're creating concepts, when you're validating the concepts, and then when you're developing the solution, which is when you really want to be, if you've got a technology, making sure that you've got your patent protection in place, developing an inventory of that, of what the assets are that you're developing solutions for, and then you're in a really good position to be able to commercialize your products or services, because it also applies to services, and it will all go back to the IP audit. When those sort of initial things that you've been able to understand about the business during those initial stages, and then developing that as the business goes through its evolution and its journey.
I think that's a really good breakdown of the aspects of 56005. How accessible would you say 56005 is for SMEs? And how would they, practically go about what you've been talking about?
There are key bits of information if you just go to the headings in the different clauses. That gives you a framework. It gives you a starting point. And then, even if the thing that is so great about using a standard is it is based on contributions from experts in the field. So if you use that framework, then you're helping to reduce your risk of missing out important steps that you really ought to be considering at certain steps of your journey. Yeah. And then, you've got it as like a sort of a guideline as your business grows, as it develops, to be able to then sort of make use of the guidelines that are within it. And then there are some annexes in it that give you some tools that you can use for, sort of how to do freedom to operate searches, how to build up a register of your IP assets, and how to manage those, and they can be, you can make them as sophisticated or as simple as you like, and they can evolve. But, if you put the right foundations in place at an early stage, then you will find that you become very quickly a lot more efficient and have a much higher quality position than if you just go about it randomly and doing things as they come up without a plan.
Yes, these are the first practical steps that an SME can take to align their IP strategy with the broader innovation management system. And I think very much also recognizing that from their early stage insight phase, there is know-how that they can add to that IP all the way through as they work through that plan and that system that they put in place. But let's get into some real life examples where you've maybe seen SMEs successfully leverage, there's a structured approach to IP and innovation management that's perhaps made them reach the market faster or has given them a significant advantage. What examples do you have, Andrew Phillips?
Thinking of one company in particular, they produced a product that it was largely used in a health and safety environment. And they saw their key market. So this came at a premium price. So they saw their key market as being the UK and mainland Europe. So to create, there was also the danger of copycat ideas from China. So they had a trademark with a logo that was clearly injection molded, printed onto the product. and they patented across the UK and Europe. And they took the interesting early view that actually, if there's a Chinese copy, we'll take that as flattery. And I think within 18 months, there were Chinese copies. They started to see those on the European market. They traced the distributor. They didn't waste time and money going after the originator, the manufacturer in China. They traced down the European distributor and did a simple cease and desist, and it protected their market. And in fact, it strengthened their market position. As what they found in a couple of places, the distributor was oblivious to the Chinese product being counterfeit and switched to theirs.
Oh, wonderful. So that's a great example.
I mean, there are a couple of really important points there, and one is the point about disputes and dispute resolution. And Andrew, you've been talking about a position where a company that went after another company because there was infringement of the IP that they had protected, but equally if a company has not taken appropriate steps to protect their IP and protect the IP assets that they are creating, then they run the risk of having other companies knocking at their door and saying that they are infringing other people's market position, and that exemplifies the importance of being able to establish whether you have freedom to operate in a particular market. And the other point that I wanted to make was that part of the IP strategy might be that you don't want to go down the route of a huge cost of getting IP protection, but you look on the market and you actually see that there are other companies out there that have IP rights that they're not making use of, and you might might approach those organizations and come up with some licensing agreements with them. So there are other ways of being able to use the IP system where you're not actually you're collaborating with other organizations in the marketplace to the open innovation is a classic example where organizations can group together and they can use shared resources to be able to create a valuable product or service on the marketplace. I mean, I can't divulge any specific companies, but I've come across countless examples of particularly startup organizations coming out of universities or tech transfer organizations that have started off with an idea. They haven't done much from an IP perspective. They've had an IP audit that has sort of carried out, has made them aware of how they might be able to make use of their IP that they're creating, and that has driven their market position. And as the company has grown, it's built up a portfolio. It has used a variety of different rights a variety of different IP vehicles to be able to create its innovation portfolio. Some might be protected by patent rights, others by trademarks, others by design right. I mean, design right is kind of in between patented and trademarking right, and is sort of is cheaper than the patent right, but it gives you sort of quite a good level of protection for the design that you have created for your product. And they, I know of a couple of examples that have gone on to become publicly listed companies. They've been able to develop their portfolio, to get investment, to dominate their marketplace, and then they've then been able to to become a sort of large multinational company. And even at the other end of the spectrum, I know other examples of, where they've gone through all of that journey. They've been bought by a big corporate organization, and then they've been spun off in a different guise, and then they start a different journey in its own right. And I do think that, part of the building of the strategy should be really sort of, looking at those short-term objectives, but also looking at the long term and thinking ahead and thinking about what considerations are necessary, and putting in place some policies and so on, and some procedures to be able to facilitate that journey, and having a standard structured approach can only support that.
For me, understanding that IP can actually not only protect you, which a lot of us seem to think that's where it begins and ends, but actually is a strategic advantage where you can use it to expand by using other companies' IP, by extending your reach and extending the duration of your cover by updating and using different devices within IP in order to extend the time that you have to make use of your intellectual property. These are all aspects of how much more effective an IP strategy can be. But the most important thing for me about IP and innovation is really a stitch in time saves 9. By early on ensuring that you have the right IP strategy and the right IP protections, it is going to significantly support you and enable you to grow your business once you're in the market. And once any detriment to your business and to the competition environment would actually cost you significantly more than that original patent costs or design registration costs or simple techniques in which to protect yourself. Andrew Phillips, what would you say is the key takeaway between IP and standards, particularly innovation management, that you would like our listeners to take away?
I think the key thing from my point of view is having a plan. And whether it's a 3-step plan or you decide you need a 10-step plan, it is actually having some points within your product development process where you pause for a coffee, you consider what you're developing, you consider the market need, you consider what's protectable in the appropriate way before you then proceed on to your next step of process. So that, for me, it's having a plan that's appropriate to your size of organization.
Andrew Stanton, what's the key takeaway?
The key takeaway for me is not to think of IP as a cost, but to think of it as an investment. And to, as Andrew Phillips was saying, to have a plan for how you are going to make best use of your investment, and to make sure that your investment is well aligned with your business and innovation strategy, and that it's reviewed at a regular basis over time, because things don't stand still. Businesses evolve, markets evolve, and you as an organization, if you want to thrive in the marketplace, you want to be able to make best use of your IP assets and to thrive within the marketplace that you are occupying.
Our thanks to Andrew Stanton, Andrew Phillips and Victoria Milne for sharing their insights and experiences on the relationship between IP, innovation management and standards. Now, to learn more about the issues discussed in this episode or other episodes in the series, and about how to get involved in standards, then check out the links in the show notes.
You have been listening to the BSI Business Growth Toolkit, a series from The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards.
You just heard a stripped media production.